Don't look back, he laughed, glass raised, while the boardroom screens behind him flickered red, and someone whispered, Caleb? The stock just halted. Before we dive into the story, I need to know something. Have you ever been humiliated in public by someone who thought you were powerless? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if you've ever believed that quiet strength still counts, hit subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. It started on an ordinary Wednesday, the kind that smells like burnt coffee and printer ink. Naomi Reed stood in line at a downtown Chicago cafe, scrolling through emails she already knew the answers to. 3 unread messages from Caleb, 2 from his assistant, 1 calendar reminder she hadn't acknowledged. Lunch, 12:30. The rooftop. Don't be late. She closed her phone. The barista called her name wrong. Nina. And she didn't correct him. She never did. Correcting people took energy. And lately, energy was something she conserved. Outside, the wind cut between the buildings, sharp and impatient. Naomi pulled her coat tighter and started walking toward the Whitmore Group headquarters, heels clicking against concrete that always seemed to echo louder around her. She knew what today was. She'd known for weeks. The Whitmore building didn't rise so much as loom. Glass, steel, security that smiled without warmth. Naomi had walked through these doors countless times, always a half step behind Caleb, always introduced vaguely. This is Naomi. Never her title, never her contribution. She signed in anyway. The guard barely looked up. Caleb Whitmore was already laughing when she reached the rooftop. His laugh carried, trained to dominate rooms. Across the table sat Elena, young, polished, draped casually over power like she'd been born into it. Naomi stopped just short of the table. Caleb didn't stand. You're late, he said lightly. I'm on time, Naomi replied. Elena smiled, amused, like this was a show. Caleb waved a hand. Let's not do this. That was when Naomi knew. Not because of the mistress, not because of the tone, because he'd already decided how this would end. You're good at walking away, Caleb continued. I always admired that. Naomi set her purse down carefully. I didn't come to be admired, she said. Elena raised an eyebrow. Caleb smirked. You came because you knew it was over. Silence stretched. The city hummed below them. Sirens, traffic, a life that would continue regardless. Naomi nodded once. I came to hear you say it. Caleb leaned back. Fine. It's done. Elena laughed softly. Naomi felt the sound land somewhere deep, but she didn't flinch. What about the accounts? Naomi asked. Caleb chuckled. Handled. The filings? She pressed. Already reassigned, he said. You were temporary. That word. Temporary. Naomi picked up her purse. Anything else? She asked. Caleb lifted his glass. You'll be fine. You always are. Elena added. Some women just know when to leave. They both laughed. Naomi didn't. She turned and walked toward the elevator. She did not look back. What Caleb didn't see was the notification lighting up his tablet. What he didn't hear was the sharp intake of breath from his assistant at the far end of the rooftop. And what neither of them understood was that Naomi had already let go of everything she'd been protecting. Earlier that morning, Naomi had been at a laundromat on the south side, her childhood neighborhood. She watched clothes tumble behind scratched glass while an old man folded shirts with care. She checked her phone once. No missed calls. She breathed. This was the last day she would stay silent. Naomi Reed wasn't just Caleb Whitmore's mistress. She was the architect of his cleanest deals, the firewall between his ambition and exposure. And for 5 years, she'd kept secrets no one else could afford to know. Back on the rooftop, Caleb's assistant finally spoke. Sir, she said carefully, we have a situation. Caleb waved her off. I'm busy. She swallowed. The SEC just froze the Whitmore Trust accounts. Elena stopped smiling. Caleb frowned. That's not possible. The assistant's voice shook. Trading's halted. We're trending. Caleb stood. Too late. And Naomi Reed? She was already 3 blocks away, standing at a crosswalk, phone in hand. A single message sent. No anger, no threat, just truth. She stepped forward as the light changed. Behind her, the empire began to fall. What Naomi knew, and what Caleb didn't, was that silence isn't weakness, it's a countdown. The news hit before Caleb reached the elevator. Phones buzzed. Screens refreshed. Voices dropped to whispers that carried anyway. Naomi felt none of it at first. She walked. That was all. Past the crosswalk. Past the bus stop where a woman argued with a driver about exact change. Past a corner deli blasting an old R&B song through a cracked speaker. Chicago kept moving. So did she. Her phone vibrated once. Then again. She didn't check it. Inside the Whitmore building, panic traveled faster than the elevators. The assistant tried to keep her voice even, but the words broke through. NYSE halted all Whitmore group trades pending review. Caleb stared at her like she'd spoken another language. That's a glitch. She shook her head. SEC flagged the trust. And the shell in Delaware. And the energy subsidiary. Elena stood, heels clicking, confusion cracking her polish. Caleb? He didn't answer. He was already calling legal. Straight to voicemail. He called compliance. Busy. He tried Naomi. It rang once. Then went to voicemail. He didn't leave a message. Naomi reached Union Station and slowed. The ceiling rose above her like a held breath. Trains came and went. People hugged, argued, stared at departures that didn't care about their plans. She sat on a wooden bench and finally looked at her phone. 57 notifications. She ignored them all. Instead, she opened an email draft she'd written months ago and never sent. The subject line was simple. Disclosure. She reread the first sentence. Clear. Factual. Calm. No accusations. No emotion. Just dates. Amounts. Signatures. Truth has a tone. She'd learned that the hard way. She hit send. Back at Whitmore Group, the board assembled without waiting for Caleb. The room smelled like coffee and fear. Screens showed red arrows. Headlines multiplied. Whitmore Group trading halted amid federal review. Sources. Internal disclosure triggers investigation. Caleb burst in. Who approved this meeting? No one answered. The chair cleared his throat. We need to discuss exposure. Caleb slammed his hand on the table. This is temporary. A director leaned forward. The disclosure is thorough. From who? Caleb snapped. Silence. Then someone said it. Soft. Final. Naomi Reed. Caleb laughed. Too loud. She doesn't have access. The general counsel slid a folder across the table. She did. She built it. Caleb's laugh died. Naomi boarded a southbound train. She took a window seat. The city blurred. Brick gave way to trees. Graffiti to backyards. She watched her reflection in the glass and barely recognized herself. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't shaking. She felt steady. Her phone buzzed again. A text this time. Caleb, we need to talk. She typed nothing. The train clacked on. A kid kicked the seat behind her. A woman across the aisle wiped her eyes quietly. Naomi closed her eyes and breathed through her nose. The air smelled like metal and winter coats. She thought about the first time Caleb had called her essential, the way it felt like a promise. She thought about the last time he'd called her temporary, the way it felt like a lie told too late. By evening, the story was everywhere. CNBC, Twitter, push alerts that stacked like dominoes. Caleb paced his penthouse, phone glued to his ear. Lawyers talked in circles. PR suggested statements that said nothing. Elena hovered, suddenly unsure where to stand. Who did this to you? She asked. Caleb stopped, looked at her. She took a step back. Naomi stepped off the train in a quiet neighborhood where streetlights hummed and porch lights stayed on for no reason except comfort. She walked 3 blocks to her sister's house and knocked. The door opened. Surprise. Then relief. You okay? Her sister asked. Naomi nodded. I will be. They didn't talk much that night. They ate soup, watched a game show, Let silence be kind. Later, Naomi lay on the couch, phone face down. She stared at the ceiling and waited for the guilt. It didn't come. At midnight, Caleb's phone finally connected. A familiar voice. Calm. Professional. Mr. Whitmore, this is Special Counsel Reyes. We received your request. Given the scope of the disclosure, we'll be in touch. Caleb swallowed. This is a misunderstanding. Perhaps, Reyes said. But it's not small. The line went dead. Caleb stood alone, city lights blinking like a crowd that had already decided. Somewhere between midnight and morning, a realization settled over him. Naomi hadn't threatened him. She hadn't begged. She hadn't warned. She had simply stopped protecting him. And if you're watching this right now, if you've ever relied on someone's silence to keep your world intact, you understand the weight of that choice. Staying with a story this heavy isn't about curiosity. It's about respect for truth. Sometimes listening all the way through is the only honest response. Morning came gray and sharp. Naomi woke early. She showered, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table and opened her laptop. There was work to do. Not revenge. Not cleanup. Ownership. Emails arrived from regulators acknowledging receipt. From journalists asking for comment. From old colleagues saying the same thing in different words. I had no idea. She replied to none of them. Instead, she opened a document titled Next. Across the city, Caleb stared at a wall of screens as markets opened without him. Numbers moved. He didn't. Elena packed a bag. This is getting ugly, she said. He didn't argue. When the door closed, the sound echoed longer than it should have. Naomi stepped outside as the sun finally broke through clouds. The air was cold. Honest. Her phone buzzed one last time. Caleb, please. She looked at the word. Just that. She typed a reply, then deleted it. She slipped the phone into her pocket and walked toward a future that felt unfamiliar, but finally hers. Behind her, investigations widened. In front of her, the truth waited. And neither of them knew. This was only the beginning. For a few days it almost felt quiet. Too quiet. Naomi noticed it first on Friday morning, standing in line at a CVS near her sister's house. The shelves were stocked. The cashier chatted about the weather. A kid dropped a candy bar and cried like the world had ended. Normal things. She paid, stepped outside, and felt the hum under her skin again. Silence doesn't mean peace. Sometimes it's just pressure waiting for a crack. Caleb told himself the same thing. Temporary. That was his word now. Temporary halt. Temporary mess. Temporary betrayal. He said it to his lawyers. To the board. To himself while staring at the Chicago River from his office window. Watching tour boats glide past like nothing had changed. This will blow over, he said, pacing. We've handled worse. No one agreed. No one argued. They just looked tired. Naomi tried to return to routines she'd once ignored. She went for walks in the morning. She helped her niece with homework at the kitchen table. She folded laundry while the news murmured in the background. Her name came up more than once. Sources confirm former Whitmore advisor Naomi Reed. She turned the volume down. Denial isn't loud. It's subtle. It's pretending the ground hasn't shifted while you're already standing somewhere new. Caleb's denial wore a sharper edge. He blamed timing, politics, enemies. He blamed Naomi last. She knew what she was doing, he said during a late-night call with a board member. She wanted leverage. The board member paused. Or she wanted out. Caleb scoffed. She wouldn't dare. He said it like a fact, like a rule. On Sunday afternoon, Naomi met an old friend at a diner off Lake Shore Drive. Vinyl booths, burnt coffee, a waitress who called everyone Han. You look lighter, her friend said, sliding into the seat. Naomi smiled faintly. I feel heavier. They talked around things. Jobs, families, the cost of eggs. Finally, the friend leaned in. Are you okay? Naomi looked down at her mug. I don't know yet. That was the truth. Caleb avoided the places that reminded him of Naomi. Then he found himself driving past her old apartment anyway. The light was on. Someone new lived there now. He sat at the red light longer than necessary. She'd always been easy to underestimate because she never demanded attention. He mistook that for loyalty. By midweek, the cracks showed. Banks asked questions. Partners paused deals. Invitations stopped arriving. Caleb's phone still rang, but the voices sounded different. Careful. Measured. Fear changes tone. Naomi received a letter instead of a call. Formal. Polite. An invitation to speak. She folded it neatly and placed it in her bag. She didn't open it again that night. Denial isn't just refusing what hurts. It's delaying what heals. That evening, Caleb finally broke his own rule and showed up unannounced at a place Naomi once loved. A quiet bookstore near Wicker Park. He stood in the aisle where she'd used to linger, fingers tracing spines. She wasn't there. Of course she wasn't. He bought a book anyway. He didn't read it. Naomi lay awake later, listening to the house settle. Her phone buzzed. A new message. Not from Caleb. From an unknown number. You don't know what you've started. She stared at the screen. Then she set the phone down and turned off the light. Across the city, Caleb sat alone in his office. Tie loosened, city glowing below. He replayed every conversation, every dismissal, every moment he'd chosen control over care. He told himself it wasn't regret, just strategy. But the word didn't fit anymore. By the end of the week, both of them understood the same truth in different ways. You can't go back to a life once you've told the truth about it. And pride, quiet or loud, will ask you to pay eventually. Naomi stood at the window the next morning, letter in hand, knowing the next step would change everything. Caleb stared at his reflection in dark glass, realizing he was running out of places to hide. And neither of them was ready for what came next. Have you ever pushed someone away because you were scared? Tell me about it. Pride is a liar. And theirs was about to cost them everything. Naomi didn't expect to see him there. That was the first thing that tightened her chest. The federal building in downtown Chicago was all glass and gray carpet, the kind of place where voices dropped without being asked. Naomi checked in, clipped a badge to her coat, and followed a marshal down a long hallway that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. She stopped when she saw Caleb. He stood near a window, hands in his pockets, jaw set like he was bracing for impact. No suit jacket, no entourage, just him. For a second, neither of them moved. Time didn't slow. It narrowed. Naomi, he said. She nodded once. Caleb, that was it. No apology. No accusation. Two names, stripped of everything else. A marshal cleared his throat. You'll both be in conference room B. Together. Inside, the room was plain. Table, chairs, a recorder blinking red, a flag in the corner that felt heavier than it looked. They sat across from each other, close enough to hear each other breathe. An investigator explained the process in a voice that didn't care about history. Naomi listened. Caleb stared at the table. When questions began, they alternated. Dates, documents, decisions. Naomi answered calmly. She didn't look at Caleb when she spoke. She didn't need to. Caleb corrected details, softened language, framed choices as misunderstandings. The truth hung between them anyway. During a break, Naomi stood by the coffee machine, stirring a cup she didn't plan to drink. Caleb joined her, leaving space between them like a habit. You didn't have to do it like this, he said. She didn't turn. Like what? Public. She met his eyes then. I did it correctly. He exhaled. You knew what it would cost me. Yes, she said. I also knew what it cost me not to. Silence settled. Not hostile, just final. The afternoon dragged. Questions dug deeper. Files stacked higher. The room grew warmer. Naomi felt the weight of every choice she'd ever delayed. At one point, Caleb rubbed his temples and laughed without humor. I trusted you. Naomi's voice stayed even. You relied on me. There was a difference. They both knew it now. When it finally ended, the investigator stood. We may need further clarification. Both of you will be contacted. Outside the room, the hallway felt too bright. Caleb spoke first. We should talk. Naomi adjusted her coat. There's nothing left to clarify. He hesitated. You're wrong. She paused, then shook her head. I'm finally right. She walked away. He didn't follow. The forced proximity didn't end there. Emails tied them together. Depositions scheduled weeks apart. Mutual contacts calling both sides, hoping for clean edges where none existed. They crossed paths again at a mediation office in Evanston. Different building. Same tension. This time they sat side by side. Caleb leaned over once. You could still help fix this. Naomi stared ahead. I am. Later that night, Naomi drove along Lake Michigan with the windows cracked, cold air clearing her head. She pulled over near a quiet stretch and sat, watching waves slap against stone. Her phone buzzed. A message from an old colleague. I never said anything. I should have. I'm sorry. Naomi typed back slowly. You can say something now. She sent it and felt something loosen. Caleb's night looked different. He poured a drink he didn't finish. He scrolled through old photos he'd never noticed before. Naomi at events, half smiling, always just outside the frame. He'd thought that meant she belonged nowhere. Now he wondered if she'd been holding everything up. Weeks passed. The process forced them into shared spaces again and again. Always professional. Always restrained. But the walls cracked. During one session, a document surfaced, Naomi's notes, written years earlier, warning of exactly this collapse. Caleb stared at the page. You tried to stop this, he said quietly. Naomi nodded. More than once. He looked at her. Something raw breaking through. Why didn't you leave then? She answered without hesitation. Because I believed you'd listen. That landed harder than any accusation. Afterward, they stood in the parking garage, engines idling, concrete humming. Caleb spoke like he was choosing each word. I didn't see you. Naomi rested her hand on her door. I know. For the first time, that felt like enough. As Naomi drove away, she felt a strange mix of exhaustion and clarity. Forced proximity had done its job. The truth was no longer abstract. It had faces, moments, costs, and somewhere deep, she sensed the next phase wouldn't be about exposure, but about reckoning. Have you ever been stuck with someone who made you feel too much? Tell me what happened. Naomi thought the hardest part was over. She was wrong. The first crack came quietly. Naomi was alone in her sister's kitchen, early morning light slipping across the counter. She was reviewing old files on her laptop, documents she'd already turned over, emails she thought she'd finished reading. When she found one she didn't remember writing. It wasn't dramatic, just a draft, unsent. Subject: I can't keep doing this. She stared at the screen for a long time. Back then, she hadn't sent it because she was afraid of what would happen if she did. Now, she realized something worse. She'd been afraid of what would happen if she didn't. The unraveling never comes all at once. It starts with small truths you avoided because they didn't fit the story you were telling yourself. Naomi closed the laptop and pressed her palms to the counter. The house was quiet. Everyone else had left for work or school. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. She let herself remember. The first late night. The first compromise. The first time Caleb said, "Just trust me." She had, and that trust had slowly asked her to disappear. Across the city, Caleb sat in a conference room that no longer felt like his. The nameplate was still there. The view hadn't changed, but the room felt borrowed. Attorneys spoke. Numbers flashed. Consequences stacked neatly into bullet points. Caleb barely heard them. He was stuck on a memory he'd ignored for years. Naomi standing in this same room, holding a folder, voice calm but urgent. If this ever comes out, it won't be small. He'd smiled then. He didn't smile now. That afternoon, Naomi was called in again. This time, the questions weren't about what happened. They were about why. Why stay? The investigator asked, not unkindly. Naomi thought for a moment, then answered honestly. Because I thought I could fix it quietly. The investigator nodded like he'd heard that before. On the drive home, rain streaked the windshield, blurring traffic lights into soft red smears. Naomi pulled over under an overpass and turned the car off. She cried there, not loud, Not long. Just enough to release what she'd been holding together with discipline and denial. She wiped her face, started the engine, and drove on. Caleb's unraveling was messier. Partners withdrew support. Friends stopped calling. The press grew sharper. One headline stung more than the rest. Inside Whitmore Group. The woman who warned them all. He read it twice, then again. Painted Naomi not as a traitor, but as a conscience. That hurt more than blame. They crossed paths again sooner than expected. A courthouse hallway. Narrow. Echoing. No chance to avoid each other. Caleb looked thinner. Naomi looked steadier. He spoke first. "I read the article." She nodded. "I didn't comment." "I know." He hesitated. "You could have said more." "I could have," she agreed. "I didn't need to." That landed. They sat on opposite ends of a bench, waiting to be called. No lawyers. No buffer. Just history. "I never asked what it cost you," Caleb said quietly. Naomi stared ahead. "You never wanted to know." He swallowed. "I do now." She turned to him then. Not angry, just honest. "It cost me myself," she said. "And I let it." Caleb closed his eyes. Inside the courtroom, testimonies unfolded like threads pulled too fast. Former employees spoke. Emails surfaced. Decisions were traced back to moments Naomi remembered vividly, and Caleb barely recalled it all. Because power dulls memory. Responsibility sharpens it. At one point, Naomi was shown a document she hadn't seen before. A memo. Caleb's signature at the bottom. A decision that crossed a line she'd begged him not to cross. She felt the air leave her lungs. Not because it surprised her. Because it confirmed what she tried so hard not to believe. Afterward, she sat alone in a hallway bathroom, hands braced on the sink. This wasn't just about exposure anymore. It was about grief. Grief for the version of herself that believed loyalty would be returned. Caleb watched from across the hall as Naomi walked away from the restroom. Face composed, eyes different. Something shifted in him then. He realized she wasn't fighting him anymore. She was mourning. And if you've ever watched someone you hurt stop arguing and start letting go, you know that's the moment you can't undo. If this story is hitting close to home, staying with it matters, not for me, but because some truths deserve witnesses. That night, Naomi packed a box. Not to move out, to let go. Old notebooks, event badges, a framed photo she'd never hung. She carried it down to the trash room and set it gently inside the bin. Then she stood there for a long moment, hand resting on the lid. When she walked away, she didn't look back. Caleb sat alone in his penthouse, the city dimmer somehow. He poured another drink and didn't touch it. He opened his laptop and searched Naomi's name. Pages of results. He clicked none of them. For the first time, he understood something he couldn't control. Reputation falls fast. But regret stays. The unraveling reached its peak the next morning. An official notice. A formal charge. Language that left no room for interpretation. Caleb read it slowly. Naomi read it too. She felt relief and something heavier. Because justice doesn't erase history. It only ends the lie. That evening, Naomi stood on her sister's porch as the sun dipped low, painting the sky soft and forgiving. Her phone buzzed. A message from Caleb. Not long. Not dramatic. "I'm sorry. For all of it." She stared at the screen, then locked the phone. Some apologies come too late to fix the past. But not too late to change the future. As night settled, both of them felt it. The unraveling was complete. Nothing left hidden. Nothing left protected. And in the quiet that followed, something even harder waited. The breaking point. Transition hook. The truth had come out. Now they would have to live with it. The rain started before dawn. Not a storm. Just steady. Relentless. The kind that soaked through coats and patience. Naomi woke to the sound of it tapping the window. She stayed still, listening, letting the weight of the last few weeks settle where it belonged. There was nothing left to uncover. No more files. No more meetings. Only consequences. She dressed simply. Dark jeans. A sweater. Hair pulled back. She looked like herself again. Or maybe like someone new who didn't need armor. Outside, the street smelled like wet pavement and early buses. She drove toward downtown Chicago with the radio off, hands steady on the wheel. Today was the hearing. Caleb hadn't slept. He stood at his penthouse window watching the rain blur the skyline. The city he once felt owned now felt distant, unimpressed. His phone buzzed with updates from his attorney. He didn't open them. He already knew how this would go. The question wasn't what he would lose. It was what would finally break him. The courthouse was packed. Reporters clustered near the steps, umbrellas bumping, voices sharp with urgency. Naomi entered through a side door, escorted quietly. Cameras flashed anyway. She didn't flinch. Inside, the air was dry and cold. A long hallway, benches filled with strangers carrying their own endings. Caleb arrived 10 minutes later. He looked smaller. Not physically. Something else. The certainty was gone. Their eyes met once. Then the doors opened. The hearing moved faster than Naomi expected. Summaries, statements, legal language that stripped years down to minutes. When it was Caleb's turn to speak, the room leaned in. He cleared his throat. "I made mistakes," he said. "I believed growth justified risk. I didn't intend harm." Naomi listened carefully. He wasn't lying, but he wasn't telling the whole truth either. When she was asked to speak, she stood slowly. She didn't look at Caleb. She looked at the judge. "I believed accountability was optional for people with power," she said. "I was wrong. It's just delayed." Her voice didn't shake. The room went quiet. Outside, the rain had turned heavier. The decision would come later. Everyone knew that. But something else happened first. As they exited separate doors, a reporter shouted Caleb's name. He turned. "Do you regret how you treated Naomi Reed?" The question hung in the wet air. Caleb opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked across the steps and saw Naomi walking away, head down, moving forward without hesitation. And in that moment something snapped. "Yes," he said. The word surprised even him. "Yes, I do." Cameras clicked. The sound echoed. Naomi didn't hear it. The breaking point didn't come with the ruling. Came hours later. Caleb sat alone in a quiet office his attorney had arranged for him. No view, no name on the door. He opened a folder he'd avoided for weeks. Naomi's early proposals. Plans he'd dismissed as cautious, ethical, boring. They would have saved everything. He laughed once. Short, sharp. Then he buried his face in his hands. For the first time in years, there was no one left to blame. Naomi's breaking point came somewhere else. She stood in a grocery store aisle, staring at shelves of cereal she didn't need. A small thing. Too small. Her phone buzzed. A voicemail from her mother. She played it. "I saw you on the news," her mother said softly. "I'm proud of you. I wish you'd told me how heavy it was." Naomi leaned against the cart. The tears came fast this time. Not from pain. From release. That evening the ruling arrived. Charges upheld. Assets frozen. Oversight imposed. Caleb read the message twice, then set the phone down. The empire was no longer his. He didn't feel rage. He felt empty. Naomi sat on the front steps of her sister's house, rain finally slowing. She held the same message in her hand. She expected relief. What she felt instead was exhaustion. Justice doesn't end stories. It just changes who has to carry them. Later that night, Caleb did something he'd avoided his entire life. He wrote a letter. Not to the court. Not to the press. To Naomi. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't explain. He wrote one page. "I see it now that I'm sorry I didn't then, that I won't ask anything from you." He sealed it. Then he didn't send it. Some truths don't need witnesses. Naomi lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe around her. She thought the breaking point would feel like the end. Instead, it felt like standing at the edge of something uncertain. Caleb had lost everything that defined him. She had gained freedom but not direction. Both of them were standing in the aftermath, unsure what would grow there. And sometimes the most painful loss isn't love. It's the moment you realize love wasn't enough to save what you built. Have you ever lost someone because you were too afraid to fight? Comment below. The fall was over. Now came the reckoning. The city felt different once the noise died down. Chicago moved on the way cities always do. Traffic filled gaps. New headlines replaced old ones. People argued about weather and sports and forgot yesterday's outrage. But for Naomi and Caleb, time slowed. Not dramatically, quietly. Naomi's reckoning began on a Monday morning that felt too normal. She sat at her sister's kitchen table with a yellow legal pad in front of her. No deadlines, no meetings, no alerts, just blank space. For years, her days had been shaped by other people's urgency. Now, no one was pulling her anywhere. Freedom, she learned, can feel like standing still. She wrote one word at the top of the page. What now? She didn't answer it right away. Caleb's reckoning began in a smaller room. A temporary apartment. Neutral furniture. Boxes still taped shut. He stood in the middle of it, jacket off, sleeves rolled, unsure where to sit. He wasn't busy anymore. That was the hardest part. No calls to return. No assistance waiting. No illusion that forward motion alone meant progress. He opened the letter he'd written and never sent. Read it again. Folded it. Set it in a drawer. Change, he was learning, doesn't come from confession alone. Comes from cost. Naomi started walking again. Every morning. Same route. Same time. Past the elementary school where parents rushed kids through drop-off. Past the coffee shop that always smelled like cinnamon. Past the lake where the water didn't care who you used to be. She let her mind wander. For the first time in years, it wasn't tethered to someone else's future. Caleb met with a counselor his attorney suggested. Not for strategy. For survival. The sessions were uncomfortable. Quiet. Full of questions he'd avoided his whole life. Why control? The counselor asked once. Caleb stared at the floor. Because if I didn't, he said slowly, someone else would. And then what? Caleb didn't answer. The silence did. Weeks passed. Naomi accepted a short-term consulting role. Small nonprofit, clear mission, limited hours. It felt strange to leave work unfinished at the end of the day. She didn't fill the space right away. She let it breathe. Caleb volunteered. Not for headlines. No cameras. A financial literacy program on the South Side. Folding chairs. Dry erase boards. People who didn't know his name and didn't care. The first day he almost walked out. The second day he stayed. There was a stretch of time, longer than either of them expected, where they didn't hear about each other at all. No updates. No mentions. That silence was different. It wasn't denial. It was distance earned. Naomi's reckoning deepened one afternoon when she visited her old apartment building. Not to go inside. Just to stand across the street. She remembered the woman she'd been there. Careful. Hopeful. Small. She didn't miss her. She honored her. Then she walked away. Caleb's reckoning reached its center on a quiet Sunday. He sat alone at a folding table after the volunteer session ended. Papers stacked neatly. A half-drunk cup of coffee cooling beside him. The room emptied slowly. And for the first time, he didn't rush to fill the quiet. He let it sit. For nearly 200 words, nothing was said. Caleb wiped down the table with a paper towel. Slow and deliberate. He stacked chairs against the wall, counting each one. He turned off the lights, one switch at a time, until the room dimmed to a single glow near the exit. Outside, dusk settled. The air was cool. He stood there longer than necessary, hands in his pockets, breathing evenly. No phone, no audience. Just the echo of his footsteps as he locked the door and stepped into a version of himself that no longer needed to be impressive to exist. Naomi felt her own shift come late at night. She was sitting on the back porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching fireflies blink on and off like soft signals. Her niece laughed somewhere inside. She realized she wasn't angry anymore. Not numb. Not afraid. Just done carrying what wasn't hers. That clarity felt like strength. In the middle of Act 7, right there, if you've ever watched someone change not because they were forced, but because they finally understood the cost, do you think people can really change when it matters most? Drop your thoughts below. The reckoning wasn't dramatic. No apologies shouted across rooms. No sudden forgiveness. Just two people choosing differently separately without guarantees. One evening, Naomi received a forwarded message from a former colleague. Caleb's been volunteering quietly. No press. Thought you should know. Naomi read it once, then closed the message. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She simply nodded, like a piece had clicked into place. Caleb, on the other side of the city, sat at his kitchen table with a notebook. He wrote 3 things: what he lost, what he learned, what he owed. He didn't put Naomi's name under the third one. He didn't need to. Spring edged closer. Trees budded. The city softened. Naomi accepted a longer-term role with the nonprofit. Not because she needed it, but because she wanted it. Purpose feels different when it's chosen. Caleb downsized again. Gave away suits. Kept one watch. Let go of the image he'd mistaken for identity. Neither of them knew it yet, but the reckoning had done its work. Not by fixing the past, but by clearing space for something honest. Something new. Something earned. They had both changed. The question now was whether change would ever bring them back to the same place. The first time Naomi saw Caleb again, it wasn't planned. It wasn't dramatic. It happened on a Saturday morning in early fall at a community center on the west side of Chicago. Folding tables lined the room. Cardboard boxes overflowed with donated books and backpacks. Kids ran past with too much energy and nowhere to put it. Naomi was there on behalf of the nonprofit she now worked with, helping set up a financial literacy workshop for parents. She wore jeans, sneakers, and a sweater with the sleeves pushed up. She felt grounded. Then she looked up. Caleb stood near the back of the room, holding a box of notebooks, listening to a volunteer explain where supplies went. No suit, no watch, just quiet focus. For a moment, Naomi considered leaving. Then she didn't. Caleb noticed her a second later. He froze, not outwardly but inside. The room didn't tilt. His heart didn't race. What he felt was steadier than fear. Respect. He waited. Naomi walked over. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he replied. They stood there, surrounded by noise and movement, in a calm pocket that felt earned. "I didn't know you volunteered here," she said. "I didn't know you worked with them," he answered. A pause. Then Naomi smiled. Small. Real. "Looks like we both found better places to put our energy." Caleb nodded. "Looks like it." They worked side by side that morning. Not close. Not distant. Easy. They handed out materials. Answered questions. Laughed once, surprised by it. No past talk. No future promises. Just present effort. At lunch, Naomi sat on the steps outside, eating a sandwich from a brown paper bag. Caleb joined her after a moment, leaving space between them. "I never sent the letter," he said. She didn't ask which one. "That's okay," she replied. He looked at her. "Thank you for letting me learn without asking you to carry it." Naomi took a breath. "Thank you for learning." That was it. No closure speech. No forgiveness ceremony. Just truth meeting truth. In the weeks that followed, they crossed paths more often. Sometimes by accident. Sometimes by choice. Coffee after meetings. Short walks. Conversations that didn't rush. They talked about books. About music. About how strange it felt to rebuild without pretending. They didn't talk about what they'd been to each other. They focused on who they were becoming. One evening, they stood at the edge of Lake Michigan. Wind cutting through jackets. City lights flickering behind them. Caleb spoke carefully. "I don't expect anything." Naomi nodded. "Good." He smiled, relieved. She added, "But I'm open to seeing what's real now." He met her eyes. "So am I." Love didn't return loudly. It arrived quietly, in consistency, in accountability, in the way Caleb listened without interrupting, in the way Naomi spoke without shrinking. They built something new, not from memory but from intention. And if you're still here, listening to this story unfold, it's because some part of you believes that growth matters, that change should be witnessed. Subscribing isn't about support for a channel. It's about choosing stories that honor truth instead of noise. Months later, a small article ran in a local paper. Former executive finds purpose in community work. No mention of scandal. No mention of Naomi. She read it anyway. She smiled. On a quiet Sunday morning, Naomi and Caleb sat at a diner off Route 66 during a road trip neither of them planned too far ahead. Vinyl booths. Bad coffee. Perfect pancakes. Caleb reached across the table. Naomi took his hand. Not the way she had before. This time she didn't disappear inside it. They didn't rebuild the old empire. They didn't try. They built a life that fit. One with space for mistakes. One with room for honesty. One where laughter didn't come at someone else's cost. Years later, people would still ask Naomi how it felt to watch an empire fall. She always answered the same way. It wasn't the fall that mattered, she'd say. It was what rose after. Some stories aren't meant to be rushed past or half-heard. If you stayed until now, it's because this one asked something of you. Honor that. On a quiet night, Naomi stood at the window of a modest home she'd chosen herself. Caleb was in the kitchen, humming softly, trying to fix something that didn't need fixing. She watched him for a moment, then joined him. They made tea. They talked about nothing. They sat together in peace. That was the victory. Do you believe some people are worth the wait? Drop a heart in the comments if this story hit you. The empire fell. But love, real love, finally had room to stand. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.